Please tell us your name.
My name is Tret Fure.
And what do you do?
I am a singer-songwriter. I am a union activist. I am part of women's culture, women's music. For the last 51 years, I've been a performing artist.
And where did you start performing?
Well, I grew up in northern Michigan, in Marquette, Michigan, and I was called the coolest sound in Marquette town. I was a folk singer at the age of 16. And then at the age of 19, I moved to Los Angeles and started my professional career. I was the guitarist and singer for Spencer Davis. I worked with him for about a year and a half. You might remember Spencer Davis. You probably don't.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what launched my career. Then I had my first record deal when I was in 1973, when I was 22 years old.
And what made you transfer or transform from a Spencer Davis to being a leading figure in the women's music movement?
Well, I was on major labels throughout the 70s. I had a major label deal with MCA Records in 1973, produced an album produced by the late Lowell George of Little Feat, so that got a lot of traction. I was dropped from the label when the president who brought me in was dropped. You kind of, if your president goes, you go too. And then I got a deal with United Artists Records and had a second album that didn't quite come out because right before my album was to be released, United Artists closed their record division and just concentrated on movies. So I got a third deal with a guy who wanted to dress me all in leather and own all my publishing and and I never had given away anything. So I backed out of that, and I realized that I was approaching 30, and I hadn't had a major label success. So I needed to get away from the mainstream, and it just so happened that I was partners with June Millington. I don't know if you know.
Sure.
Okay, so June from Fanny. We were together in my early 20s. In fact, that's how I got involved with Spencer and then Lowell George through June. And we hooked up again in 1980. And I did an album with her, and she introduced me to Chris Williamson. She wanted me to engineer Chris's children's album. And I agreed to because I read the script, and it was a fascinating story. And Chris and I just hit it off and fell in love. And as they say, the rest was history. I mean, I moved into working with Chris. I moved into the women's movement. I produced everything she did from 1980 through 1990, and then we became a duo in 1990, and we worked till 2000 through the heyday of the women's music. Oh my God, yeah.
And aside from Chris, who other would you say was an influence on not only your music but also the movement itself?
Well, it was a phenomenal time. I mean, Meg Christian was a big influence. I mean, my influences came through mainstream. People like Bonnie Raitt, who was a friend. People like Lowell George. That's where I cut my teeth on music. But when I got into women's music, it was Chris, it was Meg, it was Holly Near, Teresa Troll, and Barbara Higbee. I mean, there was a whole conglomerate of women that were making music. And we were playing to thousands of women. It was like I stepped into this arena that was unbelievable, coming from working clubs and being the opening act in a 20-seat arena, for Jay Giles and Poco, all these big groups. So to be able to walk on stage and there's 5,000 women that are there to see you or to see Chris, mostly in the early days, was a phenomenal experience. Yeah, but those were my heroes in those days. Judy Collins really was my hero, and Joan Baez. They were my heroes. But Chris and I, when we got together, we became really a duo right away. But we worked as a duo in the 90s. And I ended up being the co-producer on the Carnegie Hall album. I was the mixing engineer on Carnegie Hall, and I did most of the engineering and co-producing of all of Chris's work in the 80s and 90s. And we toured with an all-women band We toured all over the country. Chris and I toured all over the world. Yeah, it was an amazing time. Amazing time.
And I know that certainly your current music and some of your older music has a lot of political
Yeah.
impact. And how do those two things come together?
Well, interestingly, my music is much more political now, having moved back mostly into the folk world, and being a union activist as well as I'm just a political activist. But in the early days of women's music, it was the personal that was political, because we were making a statement that women are valuable, that women can make music, that women can play instruments. This was all new back then, other than a few people. That I was one of the first recording engineers in Los Angeles, women recording engineers in Los Angeles, along with Leslie Ann Jones. So we were making politics through the realization that women have power. It was the second wave of feminism, and it was something that people in the world didn't realize, the power of women. And that was our statement. Those were our politics. As things evolved, my politics became more environmental, of course, socio-political stuff that I work with all the time. Yeah.
Do you find any focus on the lesbian movement or in that area, or is it more broad?
It's more broad, but I'm out there working all the time. And my audience is mostly women still, even though I work in the folk arena, because they are the people that have stayed with me over the years. I think my politics have always been environmental. Before the women's movement, when I was in LA, I worked in the anti-nuke arena. But the politics of women became the main focus in the 80s and into the 90s. Although Chris and I always talked about environment and climate and things like that. As the women's movement started to move away from the focus of needing to gather, when we lost our center, when we no longer needed a room of our own, although I think women always do, it became more fractured. And that's when I really started moving back into the world of folk music. And, through the musician union, my politics changed. But women have always been part of the folk culture. It's interesting that through the 90s and into the 2000s, even though women were mostly doing folk music, they were two separate worlds. And a lot of my work has been to bring those worlds back together.
So when you talk about the separate worlds, what do you mean exactly?
Well, there wasn't a lot of crossover. It's like when I first played, in 2000, or 2001, I was part of a conference called the Folk Alliance International Conference. And I had a main stage showcase, which was a big deal. And when you had a showcase, you got an exhibit hall booth. And people would come up to me and say, "What have you been doing for the last 20 years?" Because my first album was a cult album. It was a very popular cult album because of my work with Lowell. And these people would come up and say, "Where have you been? Did you raise a family? Did you have children?" It's like, no, I never stopped working. You just didn't know, because those paths didn't cross, although they should have. They do now. But still, women who started the women's movement never got the success that people like the Indigo Girls or Melissa Etheridge or Katie Lang. The popularity that they gained when they came out did not translate to a lot of the early artists of the feminist movement.
No, that's certainly true. And
Yeah.
and the women that were able to be pop and folk, like a Judy Collins, like
Right.
a Joni Mitchell,
Yeah.
were really ultimately adopted by the pop movement.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
not necessarily remained folk artists in the same way.
Yeah, definitely.
And that was not the way it was for male artists
No,
who
true.
somehow were
Yeah.
automatically pop and folk and rock.
Yeah. Yeah, we always got pigeonholed. It's the women from the early. Holly, of course, Holly Near, whom I adore, has always crossed all lines because she started in the anti-war movement. She moved into the women's movement. She became a lesbian through that time, and then she moved back into world music and the folk arena. But she came from a different background. Yeah.
As did Ronnie Gilbert.
As did Ronnie Gilbert, yeah. She's definitely came from folk roots, being part of the Weavers.
Right, and working so closely with
Pete
with Pete Seeger.
Yeah, absolutely.
And yet, she was definitely very proactive lesbian.
Yes.
But yet, her public probably never knew that.
No, and it was interesting because a lot of the women, when she went back to being bisexual, a lot of women gave her a lot of crap for that. They did not appreciate that she was no longer one of them, a lesbian. And she took a hit from some women in that regard. But she never, she embraced, when she came out, she really embraced lesbianism, and to the point where they thought they owned her, and Holly cannot be owned. So, yeah.
No, those transitions are just so interesting because they, in some respect, foreshadow what is happening today with non-binary, with fluid, with experimenting, and all of those things. Mm-hmm. And those women were self-conscious enough to understand that these things change.
Right.
Their audience wasn't necessarily as welcoming.
No, they weren't. And that still happens. I have 2 trans children. And I still occasionally, if I play in a women-only space or a women-born women space, I get backlash from the trans community. So I try to avoid doing that because, I'm all about inclusion of all people, of all, sections and sectors. We are not a binary world. We never have been. But the women's movement was very resistant in many ways to trans culture. And, which has been very, very hard. The younger women are not so much. The younger people don't care or do care about inclusion. And it came out of women needing their own room, a room of their own. A lot of women came out of very abusive situations. And the older they got, the more, sort of closed-minded they got about their culture. And that always, to me, has been a detriment to our identity.
And as you said, you started in a public arena, not a women's necessarily focused arena.
Right.
And in the women's movement, when it started early on with the Betty Friedan's and the Gloria Steinems and the Bella Abzugs, it was a very cisgendered white women world who were uncomfortable when lesbians or bisexual women wanted to join that movement. Yeah. So as somebody who was performing and crossing all of those barriers, did you ever feel that political push?
I'm not sure how to answer that. The whole 80s was really sort of, it was very white, even in the women's music, and it has never much changed. There's still a big separation between women of color and the white lesbian community, which I always find offensive as well. But we come from different arenas. In the early 80s, we worked a lot with the feminist movement, with the Gloria Steinems, with the women that were trying to make a change in politics. We did a lot of political activism on our own with these women. But the music part was very different, was very isolating in some ways. But it also brought thousands of women together. It gave women an identity, a chance to be who they are. And I'm not sure I've answered your question.
No, absolutely.
Sure. Yeah.
Because what you point out is the most interesting element, which is the politics was there and people would pay attention to it, but then there was music, which transcended, at least within communities, because black women had their music. Yep. They may have liked white women songwriters and musicians, but they didn't necessarily go to those concerts.
Exactly. Yeah. It's just, some things just never change. There's still so much separation in communities, which I which I hate, which I wish wasn't true.
Well, it would be better for all of us, especially since when you look at early black women musicians, Ma Rainey,
Right, absolutely.
and Bessie Smith,
Yeah.
who were
Yeah.
pretty much out lesbians,
Right.
even in their
Yeah.
day, which was
Right.
unusual.
Yes.
They contributed so much to the music world,
They did.
but yet
They did.
they didn't always break through to white women audiences, even though white women liked blues
Yeah.
just as much as anybody else did.
Yeah, and the women in the women's community, especially in the 80s, women like Linda Tillery, who went on to work, of course, with Voicestra. Women like Mary Watkins, who's, I mean, these are women that were phenomenal. And I think in the very early days, there was more of a community of color and white together, but it seemed to separate out some, I think. But, people like, I love Linda Tillery, she's phenomenal, and Melanie DeMore, women like that, who are making music, and we're all trying to stay in the world. We're all trying to make an impression in the world. But the world always doesn't want to hear from the older lesbian culture,
And do you find that the pop culture, the current pop culture, is welcoming, or that it's just moving so quickly that it is very hard to maintain a presence? And the folk culture, which certainly exists, is one that has to move in different circles in order to maintain its audience base. So whereas you can do one show in Fort Lauderdale, Cher can sell out a stadium for day in and day out.
Of course.
It's such a vast difference.
Yeah.
And how do women help women in an age where the transitions are coming fast and furious because of the technology that's available?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not sure how. I mean, it's, I don't work in the pop world, and I don't pay a lot of attention to the pop world because I'm so ingrained in the folk world and the work I do in the folk community. And really, the folk community is quite a large community, and there's a lot more women now, in that there's a lot more non-binary women that are in the folk world, and non-binary men. And there's a greater acceptance for all sides of the gender issue in the folk world. But I don't, but we struggle. We struggle. We're never going to get that kind of attention that a Cher will get, or that, that a Pink will get, or, people like that. It's, so I don't know. We do what we can, and as an aging lesbian, one of the things that helped me through the pandemic was the fact that we all were doing virtual music, and it all kind of evened out. Everybody kind of was on the same plane in those days, and I still do online shows. And my audience is aging out, and are handicapped, or don't drive at night, or don't like to go out at night, don't want to go downtown. So so I still do those kinds of shows just to bring an audience and to keep my audience alive. But yeah, I would love to play for a large audience like Cher does.
But what's interesting to me, anyway, is that your current music, to me anyway, crosses over into that pop arena, even though it's folk. Even though you may be playing a guitar or singing with that minimalist accompaniment, the songs themselves translate and go beyond a single genre.
Oh, thank you.
So
I would hope that. Yeah.
They absolutely do.
Yeah.
And so I'm just wondering how an aging lesbian finds an entree into a world so that more people are listening. And are there young people that are in the industry, whether they're performers or executives, because the industry has changed so much,
right.
That are at least interested in keeping people successful enough that they can keep going, and that history is then shared with the upcoming artists?
Yeah, I think they are. And I think that especially if you're out there, like I'm out there all the time, so I have an audience that crosses generations. Not as much as I would like, but people at this point, I think people are looking to the women that came before and to the artists that came before. There was a time when there was nothing. There was nothing to bridge the older lesbians and the younger people, the younger women and men. I think that's changing just because as technology changes and the fact that through the pandemic there's so much more access to things online. You know, I have people all the time that go to my YouTube channel now, and I have a lot of younger people who will come to my shows or at least listen to me online because of that. And that's one way that we as independent artists can keep alive and keep growing. But, you know, I would like to make the big difference, and that's a hard thing to do. You know, I mean, I play anywhere from 30 people, 50 people to 250 people, not much more unless I'm doing a festival, you know, and again, I'm often pigeonholed as, oh yeah, the pioneer of women's music. That's great, but that's not who I am. I'm so much more than that in my work, and as are many of the artists that have come before. You know,
who do you hope to influence, and who do you believe your music has influenced?
Oh, mostly a lot of younger women. You know, I teach songwriting, I teach guitar, I teach to a lot of younger artists, and they look up to me as a good teacher and as someone who is politically minded and knows how to craft a song. So I like to try to help younger artists craft good songs and work in that vein.
Is there anything that has come out that from someone else that you're most proud of?
Well, I work with a woman named Christy Lene, who's a wonderful singer-songwriter, great guitarist, in the vein of Tommy Emmanuel. And she's a phenomenal artist, and I've worked with her a lot. And she works in the pop, kind of acoustic pop world. I work with a woman, Christina Green, in Australia, who's a wonderful, eclectic songwriter. So there are younger women who do look up to me as someone who can teach them and someone who has carried the torch that they hope to continue to carry.
And out of your contemporaries or people just immediate before or immediately after, who would you like to work with?
Well, one of my favorite songwriters in the world is Cheryl Wheeler, and I love her, and I've worked with her a few times, but not as much as I'd like. Janice Ian is another one who's a phenomenal lesbian artist who has struggled through her career, but also has a lot of name recognition. I adore Holly. I would love to do some shows with Holly. She's not touring as much, and we've done festivals together and things like that. But beyond that, there's who else? Well, I love Farron too. Farron is one of my heroes, and we've done some tours together. And she's not working as much. A lot of the women aren't working. The older women aren't working as much.
Are they not working as much because the offers aren't there, or they're not working as much because they're getting older?
I think it's a combination. The offers aren't there, and they're getting older, and it's getting harder. Yeah. Because
I did a concert at the theater at Madison Square Garden called Women in Music 1960 to 1999, and Janice was one of the artists, and she just is one hell of a guitarist.
Oh God, she's amazing. Yeah, and she's pretty much stopped touring.
And
she keeps saying
Judy
this is
Collins
my last
was
tour.
another one of the performers.
Yeah.
And Odetta and Phoebe Snow. So it was a really
right. That's great.
It was a wonderful concert.
Absolutely.
But I'm just wondering if that kind of thing is possible with the women that you just mentioned, if it's put together.
Oh, I think it's possible. I mean, one of the things that's happening in this next February and March is it's the 50th anniversary of Olivia, but it's Olivia Cruises. It's not Olivia Music, but all the artists that have been associated with Olivia or Second Wave, which was my label because I was doing more pop rock stuff with Olivia, they're all going on these two cruises. So it's a place where, they're both sold out, so I don't know what the capacity is, but they're big ships. So that's kind of where that music is being kept alive in venues in areas like that. Women are going on these cruises and they're like, I'm not even going to get off the ship because there's everybody, with the exception of Meg, will be on. Anyone who is affiliated with Olivia, especially, and then and then all the comedians who have been cruising for years with Olivia will be on that. You know, I wish we could do, and I know that Olivia wants to put together like a big show somewhere, but right now it happens on these cruises.
So who are you
Yeah.
excited that's going to be on the cruise when you're on the cruise?
Oh, well, everyone I haven't seen, because I don't work as much in the women's movement as the folk movement. People like Teresa Troll will be there, and Barbara Higbee, who I see from time to time. Chris will be on the cruise, Diane Davidson, Lucy Blue Tremblay, Deidre McCullough, just the women who came up through those ranks.
Out of all the work that you've done, the advocacy work, the union work, the music work, how do you feel it has impacted? I mean, I understand the union work myself, having been involved in unions, and I know that can reach a lot of people, but some of the music you've done has reached hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people over the course of your career.
Right. Yeah.
Where do you think your biggest impact will be in 10 years from now, in 20 years from now, when they write your biography?
I think it's the longevity of what I've done is going to be my impact because of all the work I've done, coming from the mainstream into women's music and then coming back into the folk world. I think the things that impress people the most about my work is that I've been an engineer for so long. I don't engineer anymore other than my own stuff occasionally, but being one of the first women engineers has had a huge impact, and it's had a huge impact on other women. I always try to encourage women to go into that field because women hear differently than men, you know, and they hear higher frequencies, and it's a different, you know, and producing. It's a different sensitivity. I've always found there's not quite as much ego involved with women producers. But I think also my work, because I was president of Local 1000, so I was the first woman to be a president of that union. For 6 years, I was vice president for 9 years and president for 6 years. And when I go to these folk conferences, people are like, "You're so famous." You know, they come up to me like, "Really? So I think my union work will carry me through a lot of the work that I'm doing now and the people that I reach now. But the history, I mean, the fact that I was able to step into the women's world and work with Chris for 20 years has been a great asset to me, a godsend to me, in terms of furthering myself in the independent world. You know, I never reached the mainstream success I was looking for in my 20s, but I don't think that would have carried me the way the work that I do now, because I may never make a ton of money, but I travel, I make an impact on people's lives, and that's all I've really ever wanted. You know, in the world of being a strong advocate, being a strong woman, being a good guitar player, being a good songwriter, you know, and carrying my work through the politics that I can carry. You know.
So I would think that as an artist, that is really what you're trying to do, is touch people.
Yes, that's all I ever had wanted to do. From the first time somebody moved me as a songwriter, you know, when I was a teenager, I said, I want to do that. I want to touch people's lives with songs.
Who were some of the people that did that when you were a teenager?
Bob Dylan, Judy Collins, then Joni Mitchell, James Taylor. Those were the people that I cut my teeth on, you know. And then to meet those people in my adulthood, to be able to be friends with people like Tom Paxton, and to know Judy Collins peripherally, and it's like, as a kid, it's like I want to be those people, and so to be friends with people like that, that's the greatest gift to me. You know, better than fame and fortune is that they're my colleagues, that my colleagues are people that I have grown up with musically, and have been my heroes musically.
And who of them is not only a music hero, but also someone you admire for the other work that they've done?
Well, Tom Paxton for sure, because he's a very political singer-songwriter. Who else? You know, I mean, I work with people like John McCutcheon. Who is very well known in the folk world. I don't know. That's a tough one.
I mean, Judy has been very political.
Oh, yeah, pretty much. Joan Baez is even much more so, you know. I don't really know Joan Baez. I would love to. We know of each other, but that's about as far as it goes in a lot of ways. And that's true in many regards. The people that I admire, we know each other, but not necessarily personally.
And it's difficult in a world where you're all traveling
Yes.
all the time.
Yeah. It's only at music conferences or festivals that we all actually get to sit down together. Yeah.
What are some of the biggest changes that you've seen over the course of your career in the industry?
Well, the industry has pretty much gone away. You know, I mean, but most people are doing self-recording and self-promoting. Except for the really big names, the mainstream really doesn't affect people. People have their own labels. People have their own studios. People are doing much more, do-it-yourself stuff than ever before, which has made it, in one way, has opened up the arena for a lot more people, but it's also let in a lot of people who really aren't that good, because anybody now can be a songwriter, anybody can be a performer. But it certainly has changed the dynamic of everything. You know, because then you have people like Taylor Swift, who I have great admiration for, because she's taken all her music back and re-recorded it, you know, because the industry always wanted to own you, and that is not the case anymore. And I think that's been a great positive change in the music business. But the sad part of the music business at this point, though, is that people can't sell CDs anymore. You know, I mean, you've got these streaming services, and artists don't make money unless you're a really big name from streaming services. And I talk about it every night in my shows. You know, buy the music. If you don't buy the music, we can't keep making the music as independent artists, because the streaming people are the ones, and the record companies who promote the streaming companies. And someone recently told me that Spotify has invested in the car industry, which would be why there aren't CD players in cars anymore. That kind of stuff is really, it's making music, it's going to make music obsolete unless you are a huge name, and that's really hard. People are going to have to, if you don't tour, you can't sell music anymore. You know.
But isn't that true for even some of the bigger names?
It is true for some of the bigger names, yeah. They're out on the road. The ones that are out on the road are the ones that are going to keep, you know, making a living. You know, you've got Bonnie Raitt. She's still out there on the road all the time. You know, she's phenomenal. I've known her since we were in our 20s, you know, and she's phenomenal. I love her work. She's definitely one of my heroes, yeah. But if you don't get out there and work on the road and make your money that way, there's no business anymore.
Unless you're like one of the top 5 recording artists.
Yeah, exactly, right.
And there's only one Beyonce.
That's right, exactly.
And one.
Who's still winning Grammys.
And one Taylor Swift.
Yeah.
Who broke down the music service yesterday.
Yes,
the ticket sales service.
I know, absolutely.
So, if you were sending out a message to young people, to young women, to young lesbian women, what would you want your message to be to them?
To follow your heart. You know, if the arts are so important, and this country doesn't value arts. You don't expect to necessarily make a ton of money, but follow your heart and follow your art. You know, we need more music. We need more visual art. We need more film that speak of our lives. And you know, just follow your dream wherever it might take you.
And how would you encourage people to work more together? You're talking about, you know, the times when people get to come together is so rare. It's in festivals and conferences. Are there other ways of creating those kinds of scenarios where people can come together? Because art is best when it's shared.
Yes.
Nobody wants to go to the movies by themselves.
Right.
Nobody wants to go to a concert by themselves.
Yeah. Well, for me, like, I'm doing more double bills with people that I really respect. Christine Havrila is a wonderful artist. She's a younger artist. And especially since COVID, I want to work double, triple bills, because you may make less, but you're going to draw more people, and you're going to share the stage with other kinds of artists. I think that's important. I think collaboration is very important these days. You know, we were isolated, and I think that isolation has created the need and the value of collaboration and interdependence.
And some of that collaboration, like between pop and hip hop, or
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
or talk kinds of things,
Right.
poetry,
Yeah, yep.
mixing with music
Yep.
and music performers.
Yeah, that's valuable. It's really valuable, and it's going to bring out more people. Because people want to be. Well, for one thing, people want the most they can get for their dollar, because the dollars don't stretch as far anymore. But it's also good for artists, because you get a chance to play with your peers, and share a stage with your peers, and share your dreams and your aspirations. It's important.
Sharing aspirations is certainly important, and that is basically at the core of being an artist. Is not only aspirations, but emotions and
Right.
touching people where they live. When you think about the songs that do that, and you were talking before about the songs when you were young and the songwriters,
Right.
what is it in music? I remember, I think, when Adele's first album, they were talking about these notes that she had put together that hit people, and it became this huge successful song because emotionally, and it was science, the way those notes went together, that just hit people, and they couldn't stop listening to that song. There are obviously other ways of music, but what are some of the songs, either your songs or other people's songs, that have made you say, yes, this is what I was meant to do, and it will be what I'm doing? It's like when the Beatles heard the Beach Boys.
Oh, yeah.
What would I do without you?
Yes. Oh, yeah.
And they said best, right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they said
Yeah.
best pop song ever.
Yeah.
That's a moment in time that hits people. Is there anything that you can recall that just spoke to you in a way that only music can speak to you?
Well, music is cellular. It touches you in a way that nothing else does, and that's the power of it. For me, there were a couple of James Taylor songs that is why I became a songwriter. Just his early Sweet Baby James. That's something that really touched me and made me want to be a writer. I have a song I just wrote recently called The Great Backslide. And
I love it.
And I wrote it after Roe v. Wade. I had an official showcase at the Midwest Regional Folk Alliance last month, and I opened with it, and I got a standing ovation on the first song, and people, just came up to me. And my music moves a lot of people emotionally, because I really put all my heart into what I sing, and people cry in my shows, and they laugh in my shows, and they come away feeling, so moved, and that's the gift. That's the gift that I can give, and that's the gift that I have received through the years of playing. Judy Collins, she did Dark Eyes. That's one of the most beautiful. It's a Bob Dylan song. It's one of the most beautifully emotional songs that I've ever heard. And there's just so many. But I try to sing and write everything from my heart, and music. Songs are the marriage of music and words, and if they don't mesh, you're not going to touch somebody's life. So it's really important to have strong melody and have strong lyric, and dig deep.
And thank you very much. This has been a thrill, and I hope that you are touring for many years to come.
Me too.
And I'm glad that this will be part of the Stonewall National Museum and Archives.
I appreciate it.
And
I appreciate it
we
so
are
much.
going to promote it, and the songs that you've written will be out on our website
Great.
and social media, because this is something that people should absolutely know about.
Well,
And
thank you,
enjoy.
Robert. Thank you so much.
And be touched by.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, my pleasure.